this is a lesson about one of the other really common things that students come to me and ask about, and that is, how do you know how to fit a scale to a chord? How do you know which scale fits with which chord? Just on a basic level. So let's start by thinking about what the goal is. The goal is, the holy grail is to be able to play what comes into your head in the moment. So it's about pleasing your taste, what you want to hear. Or another way of looking at it is that you are being like a vessel or conduit for the music to come through and speak. So if you're going to be an effective ambassador for the music, or looking at it the other way, if you're going to be able to play what you really want to hear and really please your own taste, then you need to be able to make that connection and play what you would hear in the moment. You want to know what it's going to sound like before you play it, or as you play it. That's the goal. So if we look at it that way, instead of looking at it from a kind of theoretical point of view of, well, let's think, how does this fit with that, and why does that fit with that, and what are the rules I need to learn? If you look at it more from the point of view of playing the sounds you want to hear, I find that that's a much better way of getting the same information to come in a way that's instantly accessible to you as you're actually playing. So you do need to know some theory in order to take this approach. So I'm going to explain that now. It's not a huge amount of theory. It's not hugely complicated, but you do need to know a certain amount. I'm not going to explain everything because a lot of it is so freely available that if you don't know it, you can just go away and find it and then watch the video again. So the concepts I'm going to start with, which I'm not going to explain, is the concept of an interval. So we have a root note and we have intervals. And then we have chords, basic kinds of chords. We have major, minor, dominant chords. We have augmented, diminished, and sus chords. So there's 6 types of chords we're going to discuss. Now, if you don't know what these things are, it's easy to find that out. Just go on the internet and find out what that is and learn it. It's not complicated at all. It's pretty simple, actually. But you need to know that before we can discuss any further. And that's pretty much all the theory you really need to know is what makes a well, I'll tell you just to start with, a major chord is a root, a third, and a fifth. Root, a major third, and a fifth. And a minor chord is a root, a flat third, and a fifth. And a dominant chord is a root, major third, and fifth, and a flat 7. So there you have it. I mean, that's pretty simple, right? So if you don't know that stuff, go and learn that, and that's the only level you really need to have. And intervals, what's an interval? It's the distance between 2 notes. But you need to know these different intervals and what they are, what they're called. There's 11 different intervals, okay? So learn those, then come back and watch this. Now, if we think of chords, the way I think about chords is that you've got 3 big families and 3 small families. The 3 big families are major, minor, and dominant. Now, the reason I call those the big families is because they're the most commonly used chords. They come up the most often, and they have the most alterations that you can make to them. The 3 small families cover what I call the 3 small families, cover the augmented, diminished, and sus chords. Why do we call them the small families? Because they don't come up as often as the other ones, and there's less variations on them. So the other reason I break them into these 2 categories, big and small families, is because I find that if you learn the sounds in the 3 main families of chord, major, minor, and dominant, you'll be able to hear them over the small families. You don't really need to learn it separately over those. You'll find that once you really know those sounds well over the 3 main families, you'll be able to hear them over pretty much anything. Now let's have a closer look at intervals. Look at them on the neck of the guitar. So I'm going to start here with a G, and then find another G an octave up. Now between these 2 Gs, there are 11 possible other notes. each a different distance from the root note. And each has a different sound. So if we start with the flat 2, which is 1 semitone up, listen to that against the root. You can hear that it's quite tense, dissonant sounding. And then we go 2 to what's called the second. That's the flat 2 with a minor second, and that's the 2 with the second, and that has still some tension, but not as much. And then we go to 3 frets up to the minor third. It's called the flat 3 of the minor third. Play that back here, and at a 5th, we get a minor chord. So that flat 3 has a minory sound to it. We go up 1 more from there. We have a major third, which you can also play back here and add a 5th. We get a major chord. So that has a majory sound. You can see how these intervals are tying into the chords we were looking at a little while ago. The important thing we're concentrating on here is the sound of these things. And you can hear that this sounds, for example, very different from a major third from, say, the flat second. Very different sound. The next one is a 4th. Now this one sounds quite smooth against the root, or consonant. Next up is the exact halfway point between the root and the octave, and that sounds like this. And that can be called the sharp 4 or flattened 5th. Some of the intervals have more than one name, but that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you call them, as long as you know what it sounds like and where it is. So this is the halfway point. Some people think of this one as sounding suspenseful or evil or strange, but it may not sound like that to you. It doesn't matter. It just matters that you know how it does sound for you. And then we get the next one up, which is the 5th, which again, like the 4th, sounds quite smooth and consonant with the root. Now, let's take a little break here before we finish going through them to just explain that learning these intervals is not just useful, but it is the thing that you need to do. The most important thing, in my view, of anything you can learn on any instrument is the sounds of these intervals. And the reason for that is because learning those sounds or those colors is your connection to being able to play what you hear in your head or what the music suggests. They are the connection and the key to the whole thing. They are also the key to understanding how and why modes or scales fit with certain chords. When you really know these sounds and where to find them, it becomes patently obvious why a certain scale fits with a certain chord, and we'll see why that is later. So, carrying on now, 1 up from the 5th is the sharpened 5th or flattened 6th, and to me, the sound sort of has a sort of sad sound, and it wants to resolve down to the 5. It may sound different to you, that doesn't matter, as long as you know the sound. Next up is the 6 or major 6, also found up here. And then the flat 7 next up. And if we add the 3rd and say the 5th down below, and then that flat 7 up here, we have a dominant chord. We remember how they were made. And then final one, which is a semitone below the root, or the octave, is the major 7. And again, because it's quite close to the root and seems to want to resolve to it, it's got some tension to it. But it's a very different kind of sound to the other tense note we looked at, which is the flat 2. Listen to that sound and compare it to that sound. Really different. And each one of these sounds completely different from each other. They're all like different colors. And once you know these sounds or these colors, the sound of them and where to find them, then it unlocks the whole thing. So this is such an important thing. It's, in my view, it's the most important thing in playing, is to be able to make this connection. And as I said, looking at it purely from the theoretical point of view, isn't for most people the direct way of doing it. You want to be able to do it in a way that's instant. So there's no real thinking involved. So I'm going to look at more at modes later, but for now, I'm just going to show you one of them just to demonstrate the idea of how they're made up from these colors or interval sounds. Now, modes are a very useful set of scales that come from the major scale shape, and for guitarists, because of the way we play, it's a convenient thing for us, because from the major scale shape we get a bunch of scales that give you the perfect scale for all the most common chords. So that's why modes are so significant, and we'll look more at those later. But for now, I'm going to play one mode, and it's going to be the second mode, or the Dorian mode. So here's the root, stay on the same root, go up to the next note in the second mode, or the Dorian mode, and that's a 2. And it has a flat 3. So it's a minor scale, minor mode. It's got a 4, it's got a 5, it's got a major 6, a flat 7, and back to the root. So that's the Dorian mode, and it's just a set of colors. And all the different scales, all different modes are just different sets of intervals, so I could play. It's just a different set of colors, different set of intervals. So all scales and all modes are just a set of these 11 intervals, and it's like putting together colors. And it's the same with chords, and you will see how chords and scales are really one and the same thing when you think about them from this point of view. And the whole key to it is to think about the sounds and what sounds you have in these. And remember that each of these sounds is got a unique character or quality to it. So if we go back to this flat second and listen to that sound, I've been using a G, but if I started on some other note like an A sharp, still got that same tense sound, or a C, still got that same tension to it. Or any note I decide to play, flat second on, it's going to have that sound. Just like if I play a fifth, whatever note I start on, if I start on an F instead of the G, it's still got that same sound. Or a B, still got that same sound of a fifth. Whatever note you choose, whatever interval you choose, a flat fifth or a major 7 or whatever it might be, a 6, it always sounds like a 6 wherever you start. Or flat 5, wherever you start, always has that same sound. So you can learn the whole thing just starting on one root note, and you've learned your whole palette of colors. So that's a closer look at intervals. If you think what we were talking about a minute ago, where the goal is to be able to play what you hear, or what you want to hear, or what the music speaks, what the music is asking for, in the moment, you need to be able to connect the sounds with the fingers and the fretboard. That's the only thing that's really matters. I mean, if you can mechanically play the notes, then the only thing that really is important beyond that is being able to do that task of playing what comes into your head in the moment, because the music demands it or asks for it, or because it's what you personally want to hear at that moment. This was lesson 1. It was an introduction to the whole concept of how to approach understanding how scales fit with chords. And incorporated in this whole thing is actually how modes work, what modes are, how to use them, how they work. All part and parcel of the same thing. So when you understand all this, you'll know that too. Modes will cease to be a mystery, and you'll understand how and why to use them. Lesson 2, we're going to talk about some of that, and we're also going to start actually looking at or listening to the sounds I've been talking about. So, see you in lesson 2. A very special flavor to it. What about the 4? Play the sharp 4 instead. And to me that sounds a major 6, a flat 7, and the root. So it's like a minor scale with that colourful major 6 in.